Yep, we are recording now.
Okay, thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. So the purpose of today's webinar is to give a brief overview of the work of the task force that is adapting project outcome for academic libraries, and particularly the field testing process. I know that I see some names I recognize. Some of you have volunteered to field test already, and hopefully some others will at the end of the day. So we are just going to give kind of a brief introduction to the work we've been doing, and then the most of the time will be devoted to answering any questions you might have about the project or about the field testing process. So we will start with some introductions. Eric?
Oh, hello everyone. I'm Eric Ackerman. I'm from McConnell Library at Radford University, and I am the chair of the Project Outcomes for Academic Libraries Task Force.
Thank you. So you already heard from me. I'm Sarah Gick. I'm Mellon ACLS Public Fellow at ACRL, and I am a staff liaison to this project. So you'll primarily be dealing with me on the logistical side of things. And then with us, we also have Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Plowman. I'm project manager for the Project Outcome Toolkit on the Public Library Association side of things, and manager of impact and advocacy for the PLA as a whole.
Okay, and Emily, do you want to go ahead then?
Sure. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about how this partnership came about. The Public Library Association launched Project Outcome 3 years ago in San Francisco for public libraries. Some of you might already be familiar with it because you can register and access some of the resources we have online at www.projectoutcome.org that are all designed to help libraries move towards more outcome measurement-based decision making. The Project Outcome Toolkit is a free online toolkit. We have a survey management and data dashboard. We have survey management and data dashboard features that are available to public libraries that want to measure the outcomes of their programs and services. And sitting within our toolkit are surveys that were developed by the field, for the public library field, from a task force that consisted of public library, state library staff, and researchers. And the surveys that we have made available to public libraries have been really popular since we've launched the product. So what libraries are able to do using the Project Outcome Toolkit is not only understand what outcome measurement is, be able to just use this as a knowledge base, a place where they can share with their peers, but they can also go in and measure the outcomes of programs and services. And if you can switch to the next slide really quick, Sarah. So the surveys, as I shared, we have 7 topics that cover the majority of programs and services that are offered in public libraries. So we have education and lifelong learning, economic development, job skills, summer reading, civic and community engagement, digital learning, and early childhood literacy. And libraries can go on, they can pull the standardized surveys off of the toolkit, they can hand them out immediately after a program or service concludes, or they can follow up with patrons later. And what they're doing is they're really gathering this feedback from the patrons directly about what they learned, if they changed their attitudes, or if they plan to change a behavior. And when they collect these outcomes and report them back into the system using our survey tool, we're able to allow them to aggregate data across the topics. They can take a look at how they're doing relative to their state and national averages. And then we also at a national level can look at a very high level about, we can look at trends and activity that's going on nationally around not only the types of programming that's happening, but the outcomes that are occurring as a result of libraries offering these programs and services. Libraries also have access to customized data reports. So they're able to go on once they've entered the data in our system and be able to run custom reports that they can provide to their boards or they can use for advocacy purposes. And what's been really exciting is that libraries are doing this. They're starting at a very entry level kind of practitioner focused point in time when they access our toolkit, and they're able to run these surveys, look at the data, make changes. They're making small changes to maybe making a program improvement all the way to using the data to apply for new grants or to gain additional support from their boards or friends groups. So they can use our data dashboards. We have not just reports, but different ways that they can analyze the data on those dashboards. And then they can interact with them however they need to kind of get a better sense of what their outcomes look like at the library level. They can use the outcome, they can use the surveys, they can use one survey and just run it once, or they can run a survey multiple times. They can run it across all 7 topics if they like, but we don't put a lot of requirements around the amount of surveying that they do, because what we really are ultimately working towards is helping to shift the field towards more outcome-based thinking and outcome-based program planning and measurement. So some of what we've put in place is just really around helping people feel comfortable measuring outcomes. We have some library staff that are out there that are super well versed in collecting data, and then we have some that maybe have never collected data before. We have small libraries with just one person. We have large libraries with a big complex system of different departments and staff types. And all of those types of libraries can use the system to any degree of advanced measurement or simple measurement that they want. And then we offer free online resources, as I mentioned already, and ongoing training. We offer quarterly webinars that are at no cost that anybody, whether they are using the system or not, can register for. So we launched this, as I shared, 3 years ago, and what we've really heard from the field is that we have been able to offer them something that is easy to use and really accessible, and that a library of any size can gain benefit from. And because it's free, we've also reduced a lot of barrier in terms of participation. What that has led to is this partnership with ACRL, where we had heard within the system from a number of libraries, a number of academic libraries who had registered for the Project Outcome Toolkit, seen the resources they have access to, and wanted to be able to survey using our toolkit. We heard from them that they saw that there was a lot of use in the academic field as well, that they felt that they could either take the surveys as is, or that they could see modifications being made to the surveys, and that would really benefit the academic field. Especially for those of you who may not have access to advanced measurement tools. And there are other advanced measurement tools that are out there. I think what we're really trying to do here is help support libraries that have a variety of different type of outcome measurement needs that may not have the capacity or the training or the ability to move down a super advanced survey measurement path. And what we've definitely heard along the way is we've developed a task force, and we did one presentation in Salt Lake back in June, is that this is something that libraries can find use from, and that being able to adapt a set of measures specific to the academic field can really help support a lot of libraries that want to be capturing outcomes of your own services, and being able to do that within this kind of centralized, standardized system so that there's an opportunity to do more peer aggregation. I'll turn it over to Eric. I see we have a couple of questions coming in. I don't know if we want to take those now or push them to the end.
Well, why don't we just run through the introductory part, which is what we're doing now, and then just start with the questions as we go along. How about that?
Sounds good. On to you then.
Okay. Well, Emily's covered a fair amount of this slide already, which in a much better way than I could have. And just wanted to point out or to emphasize one of the things that Emily did touch on, and that really is this ACRL adaptation of project outcomes is designed to run the entire gamut of the needs of academic libraries of all types, from community college to four-year comprehensives to R1s, and from privates to publics. So it's pretty broad, and I think we're headed in the right direction there. And the timeline is coming up in a minute. There we go. So here's where we stand. The task force first met in March, and in the process between March and, say, the end of May, early June, we chose 7 new survey areas and wrote standard outcome statements for each. And they were all based on the project outcomes existing surveys, which we have literally adapted to 7 areas that are somewhat more relevant to academic libraries. The field testing, which is the part that y'all are primarily interested in, is starting now this month and will run through October of this year. And we hope to take the data that we get in November through January and run revisions, analyze it and do revisions. And then from that, develop the final online toolkit and do the support sources. The goal is to launch a functional ACRL project outcomes at the next ACRL conference in April. So it's a pretty ambitious goal, and it's a pretty ambitious timeline, but the task force has risen to the occasion, and I think we're well on our way to meeting it. The 7 surveys and outcome measures that we did settle on were undergraduate instruction, events and programs, research support, teaching support, digital collections, library spaces, and library technology. Now, we also include, and didn't want to make the slides too unwieldy, but we also include a brief description of what do we mean by undergraduate instruction, what do we mean by events and programs, what do we mean by research support, how is that different from teaching support, where does digital collections come in, and things like that. So your first step in choosing the correct, or not the correct, but the survey that you may want to use is to not only look at the title, but also look at the brief description and then check the questions to decide, is this the survey that really is going to capture what you want to know? And it's not, the 7 surveys are trying to cover a great deal of ground for a broad range of users. So you have to use a little bit of discretion about how your local context fits into this. To help out a little bit, the basic survey structure is the first 4 questions are designed to measure the 4 types of outcomes we're looking for: user knowledge, confidence, behavior change, and awareness. And all 4 of those questions are Likert scale 1 to 5 responses. There are 2 open-ended questions that follow for a total of 6 questions. And that 2 open-ended questions are, what did you like? And then what else could we do to help? And at some point in the very final version of the toolkit, you'll be able to add up to 3 additional questions, but not during the field testing phase. Okay, and so remember, the benefit of all this is of standard quantitative questions that you can benchmark about how your library is doing compared to others. Initially, we're going to start off with 2 benchmarks for academic libraries. One of them will be Carnegie classification, and by this we mean the general basic classification. You know, the Carnegie classification has evolved into a rather complex arrangement of things, but we're thinking more in terms of the general kind of what it was before they made it so specific. That will be one benchmark, and then a national benchmark. As things progress over the next, I'm guessing, two to 3 years, depending on the availability of funding and the amount of data we have, there may be a way of adding state level comparisons. But for now, the two benchmarks will be Carnegie classification and nation.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So I will take over from here and talk a little bit more about the field testing process. So once you have volunteered, for those of you that have already done so, you will get an email from me that has an information sheet with additional information, but I'll just go over some of that briefly now. So we ask on the volunteer form that you choose summer or fall, and then also that you choose which surveys you are going to field test. This is primarily so that we know kind of what to expect in terms of data collection. So you're not necessarily held to that, but we did want to make sure that we had some people that would be field testing the surveys this summer so we can start analyzing the data. But we also understand, of course, that academic libraries tend to get much busier once the fall semester starts. So the field testing will continue into the first part of the fall semester through the end of October. The surveys as well, we just want to make sure we have relatively good coverage across all of them. So that's why we ask that you let us know which ones you're interested in doing. You're not held to that necessarily, but I would ask that you let me know if it changes. So when you get the information sheet, that contains links to the surveys themselves. So for the field testing part, you're not field testing the whole feedback, the whole toolkit. You're field testing the surveys. So the surveys the links are in SurveyMonkey, and I've also included a link to PDF versions of all the surveys. You can do either one, but we do need you to enter the responses online so that we can support everyone who wants to field test. We just don't have the capacity to support doing manual data entry for everyone. So you can administer them however you choose, but we will need the data entered online. There is no minimum number of responses required, nor any minimum number of surveys that you have to administer. You can do whatever suits you. If you just want to do it for one program, that's fine. If you want to run the survey for 20 programs, you can do that too. It's really up to you and your needs. We do ask that for each sort of discrete program or service that you survey, that you submit a feedback form. So we want to know how your library users are responding to the surveys, whether they're understanding the questions, that sort of thing. And so the feedback isn't asking about whether you have trouble getting to SurveyMonkey, but it's really about the questions and the topics, how you're using this data, or general comments that you have. Are these surveys serving your needs? I'm sorry about the microphone problems. I can't really do anything. I don't know what is causing the problem there, so hopefully you can hear me. Okay, so the links are here. I can try and copy them. Oops. I'm sorry, I can't get to the links while I'm showing the slides, so maybe someone else can copy them into the chat box, but all the information is on the ACRL Insider post. The link to the volunteer form is there as well. So I think that is pretty much it for the moment, and now we will try and answer any questions that you have. Okay, oops, sorry. Okay, so one question. So I work at a graduate school. Are we welcome to volunteer, or is this only for schools with undergraduate programs? Yes, we would definitely like to see you volunteer. Not all of the 7 surveys are intended for undergraduate. So you'll notice one is specifically called undergraduate instruction, but the one on research support, for example, we could envision being used for undergraduates, graduate students, or faculty. And the teaching support one is actually intended as a survey for faculty as well. See what else I can answer.
Well, there was sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt.
go ahead, Eric.
There was actually an earlier question up top about has the task force anticipated any concerns on the part of the college administrators regarding an outside agency aggregating the survey data? And if so, what were the concerns and how have they been addressed? I'm pretty sure if I understand the question is there is no identifying information collected beyond the name of the institution, your library, so you can do it. The aggregation is just so you can do some comparison. It's really no different than, say, if you were to participate in, say, LibQual, where you have a great deal of data going to them, they aggregate it, but nothing can come back to individual students or individuals at all. And I think it's the same way here. So you can find out, it's just basically how we doing either against our peers or against other people who are using the survey or however you want to set it up. So generally, I only have run across this question in IRB situations, and they're pretty happy with the idea. If you just show them a copy of the survey, show them a sample of the data you can get for how it's aggregated, how there's nothing that can be traced back to individuals, and that usually does the trick.
I don't know if that answered the question. Okay, hopefully.
If not, let me know.
Yeah.
About
the demographic data as well, I'm not sure whether that question is meant to be about the field testing process or the toolkit more generally. So obviously we're not collecting that sort of information in field testing. In the toolkit, the final toolkit, in addition to the 6 standard questions, you would be able to ask up to 3 additional questions. I think we recommend that you don't ask for personally identifying information, but we can't necessarily stop anyone from doing that if you're writing a custom question. But we are not explicitly collecting that sort of information. If that answers the question.
There's another one about if we use the survey for one instruction session, do we need to submit a feedback at that point?
Yes.
Yes. As an assessment librarian, it's like, yes, because think of each session as a data point. And the more data points you have in there, the more you're going to get back from it.
Yeah, so even if you run the same instruction session, say 3 different times, we would ask that you fill out the feedback form each time, just so that we know in case there were different reactions, if that makes sense. Just to go back to the demographic point, yes, so I mean, if you, in the final version of the toolkit, one of your custom questions could be, are you, a part-time student or a full-time student? That you can totally do that. What I was saying is that we recommend that you, for example, not ask for a student ID number, or that we cannot guarantee that we would protect that sort of personally identifying information. That would be, a disclaimer in the terms and conditions. But certainly, if you want to ask what type of student or what class they're using this resource for, or something like that, that is definitely a question that you can add. Again, once we get to the final version of the toolkit. Eric, do you want to talk about benchmarking? That question.
Sure. Actually, I was going to touch on IRB very quickly.
Sure.
Just to point out that our institution submitting for IRB exemption, that's between you and your IRB. And while I don't have exhaustive experience with different institutions, I am constantly amazed at how different institutions interpret the same regulation. So the first thing you want to do is talk to your IRB and see what they consider for exemption. Ours goes out of its way to exempt library survey research, which is essentially what this is, using survey format to gather anonymous anonymized data for improving services. However, not every institution looks at it that way. So that's really the only answer I can give you for that one. As far as benchmarking goes, let me see, be sure I get the right question. Again, it's going to be the reasons that Carnegie classification and nation were picked is the capacity of the current system, project outcome system, only allows for 2 benchmarking fields, if I'm correct. And Carnegie classification, of course, is a big one for academics, but at what point do you want to aggregate those? There was a strong push for state level, but initially there's not going to be enough data in the system to support any kind of state level comparisons. So the thought was to go ahead and do it on a national level, and then as time progresses and hopefully the use of the ACRL project outcome survey improves and increases, then there'll be a sufficient amount of data in the system to start parsing it by state. So I don't know if that addresses the actual benchmarking question. I didn't quite see it, but if not, let me know.
Yeah, so I'm not sure either what the intent of that was, but just as well, so when you administer a survey, you'll get your quantitative results for those 4 standard questions, and that's what you can then compare your institution's results against others in your class or nationwide. In terms of accessing the data, again, I assume this is related to the final toolkit. You set up an account the same as you do in the current system, and then you create the surveys and enter the data and get access to it that way. And it's based on the institution that you are. When you register, you enter what institution you're a part of, and so you see the data for that institution.
There was a good follow-up on the demographics about how important it is to even distinguish between full-time, part-time, and dual credit. I think, in fact, and I guess it was Mr. Howden's question, that you could collect it locally and not submit it to the project. That's absolutely correct. And if that would really only work, however, if you're using a print version or you set up your own electronic version, because if I understand correctly how the project outcome one, you're restricted to what's actually electronically is what's actually there. So now I'll be the first to admit we've had great deal of success getting much higher response rate using, believe it or not, these short print surveys. So if you want to add additional fields to it, by all means do so. We do it all the time. So that's just something to consider. And what it will do, it'll allow you to add more local context to what are very generalized surveys. So that's always a possibility. Now, whether you are going to have that and can compare it as a benchmarking feature, you may want to contact other individual libraries that you think would be comparable and see if they're willing to do a similar project. But that would have to be something done on the side. Does that help any? Okay.
Okay, there is a question above about administering the surveys. If you want to administer them electronically, yes, like for the field testing, when you volunteer and get the information sheet, you'll get a link in that to each of the surveys that goes to the survey in SurveyMonkey. So you can share that link with the students or users directly. And then as well, once the toolkit is complete, when you start a new survey, you can get a link to that as well and share that and have students fill out the surveys electronically again, or you can choose to administer them on paper.
The question about, is there a difference between the data we can see about our surveys during the field test versus what we'll see when it's final? Probably so. The whole point, of course, of the field test is to be sure that it's actually usable in its current form. Chances are, given the feedback we have, there will be changes to some of the questions. Some may not change at all, but if you're thinking you can take the survey data from the field test and compare it directly to the final one, that may or may not be the case. So I wouldn't count on it, because we will take the feedback seriously and we will make changes as needed. Okay. How do the questions for the different subject areas differ? You'll have to go to each one and look, because they are, they can seem similar and they can seem very different. So again, my thought would be to encourage you to use the titles of the surveys to kind of rough sort the possibilities, go into the brief description, and then check the actual questions to see if this is really what you thought it was going to be and what it was going to capture. So the follow-up is on the data. So we're not going to get our data from our trials that they're about to do. Are we sharing the data?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I
yeah.
thought. What you may not be able to do is compare that data with the data you may get using the final version. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that. I apologize.
Yeah, so just to be really clear, you're not putting the data into the project outcome toolkit at this time. We're testing the surveys, and then once the surveys have been revised, that's when the final toolkit will be available. So right now, the data is just going into spreadsheet. So if you want your data, I can certainly share it to you once the field testing is complete, and I can send you a spreadsheet with the data from your surveys, your institution. But it's not going to be like the toolkit, the dashboards aren't going to be accessible at this time.
Okay, there's, just to confirm, there's no manipulation of questions during the field testing, correct? However, since you already see something you may want to change, go ahead and try it in its existing form. And if you still want to change, excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied here. If you still want to change it, please include that in the feedback. But it would really disrupt the whole field testing process if we started manipulating the questions halfway through. So what you see at this moment is what we'll be field testing, but please don't hesitate to give us feedback about what you think will make it better.
Okay, on the question, so it looks like these are mostly intended to be given after a specific event, workshop, instruction session, etc. Is it inappropriate to distribute some of these more openly? Yes, as you mentioned there, the technology survey, the space survey, those obviously don't necessarily relate to specific events. So if you, for example, wanted to give out a survey anytime someone reserves a group study room, that's going to be more kind of open-ended, and that is definitely, that was the intent there, I think. And Eric, did you have anything to add on that?
No, I think that's absolutely correct. Some of them are very event-driven and others are not. So
sorry, could you both clarify? The question was, is it inappropriate to distribute some of these more openly?
No, not at all. And and this is the role of local context. If you look at this and say, wow, I could really use that in a more general sense, like I could send it to the whole campus about our event program. You know, have you attended any events? I'm just making this up about which one we're using, but we do it all the time. We have a lot of events. And so you wouldn't necessarily just have to give it to the people who attended the event. You could simply send it out campus-wide at the end of a semester or at the end of the year. I would. If you think that would be useful and the results would be useful, absolutely. Does that help? That's kind of what I...
Okay. Other questions or anything that we might have missed?
Could you just clarify again that we won't be doing any benchmarking for the pilot testing, correct? Or just providing our
Yes,
data back?
correct.
Okay. And there won't be benchmarking, like we won't aggregate up across all the results, correct?
Well, in terms of what we will do, our analysis will probably do that. But in terms of the data that we share with volunteers, you will get your data from your institution, just the raw survey responses.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the final toolkit is launched, that's when you input data into that, it will automatically allow you to benchmark against others.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing some people leaving, so hopefully this is answering your questions. Definitely, if we haven't answered your questions, let us know now. We have a couple minutes, or send me an email as well. Is it helpful for one person per college to volunteer for their institution? Yes, more than one can if you'd like, but yes, we definitely like to have at least one person from an institution.
As the field testing goes forward, if it becomes evident that a change may help clarify the surveys, will a change be made? And just remember, any changes will be made at the end of field testing. However, if you come across one that you really think is important, the feedback is where you need to put it so we can get that.
Yeah, that's the purpose of this process is really to hear what you think, what is useful or not, what changes should be made. So definitely make suggestions as you try these out. Will you be able to import data into the final toolkit? Emily, do you want to say something about how that works?
So you will not if a question set changes in any way. So if one particular topic has even one change to a question, you won't be able to import that data into the final toolkit because you're not, the question won't be, the answers that you receive to the question won't, the questions won't match. If we have one set of surveys, one survey topic that we manage to just nail and everyone says it's great and the questions are written perfectly and we don't make any edits to those questions, you can go back in once the toolkit is up and running and you should be able to enter the data into the system. But I think that we, for the most part, will generally recommend not to. And if there is an opportunity that we see because there is one specific topic we didn't change, we might send out an FAQ about that. But I would say is to generally assume that you won't, again, because those questions are likely to change. And, you know, if we think it's a possibility that we want to recommend that we put it, that, you know, we specifically state if you measured in this, you can import it, we'll send that out as more of an FAQ, not a general notification.
But when the final toolkit is available, people can batch upload, right?
Yeah, they'll be able to batch load, upload. There'll still be a, you'll still need to set it up so that the system recognizes that you ran a survey, but you can create a path to put the data in.
Okay, thanks, Emily.
I don't, there's a question about, are there specific timeframes for conducting the surveys? Not that I'm aware of.
Well, just I mean, the dates for field testing. So when you volunteer, we did ask that you say whether you do summer or fall, and it all has to be done by October 31st. But other than that,
there you go.
It's up to you. Okay, so question, different volunteers from a single institution. A few of us would like to participate at the same institution, different campuses. Should we each individually submit the volunteer forms? And so far, only one person did volunteer. You can do it either way. The one person who did volunteer can share that information that I sent, and you can administer it separately, or you can all volunteer. It's up to you. The only constraint would be that if two different people at the same institution are doing the same survey on the same day, I might not be able to tell which one did which, because the survey at this point just asks for an institution, and then it will have a data timestamp on it, and we're going to be using that to to send you the data that you collected. But it meant that, you know, if there's two programs going on using the same survey at the same time at the same institution, I can't tell which one is which. But up to you how you want to handle that, whether just one person wants to manage it or multiple people. Certainly, we're happy to have multiple people from the same institution volunteer and run surveys.
Actually, we run a fairly decentralized, say, for example, instruction program. So as long as, and say if all of my instruction librarians signed up to participate, you know, as long as they're not duplicating somebody else's data entry, I see no reason why each individual section couldn't be done. But it's up to you. Depends on how you want to organize it. So.
Yeah, and certainly once the final toolkit is out there, as many people from an institution can register and use it as you want. It's just slightly more complicated for the field testing process. Okay, question regarding data aggregation. Will data from a specific college be visible by anyone using Project Outcome and/or the general public? No. You see data from your institution, and for the benchmarking, you see averages from all other institutions in a class or all other institutions nationwide. You never see, you don't see data from someone else's institution. Other questions? I will be, I've gotten quite a few questions over email, and I'll be taking the ones we've gotten today and putting like an FAQ page up online, so, you know, for reference, and the recording of this session will be available as well. You should get a link to that. But if you have any questions now, the last few minutes, we can answer them. Otherwise, we can call it a day.
And one thing I'll just say to those of you still on the phone, thank you for being willing to participate. One of the critical factors to success for the public library version of Project Outcome was that we had libraries that were in the field that, you know, were practicing, staff who were practitioners, testing these questions and giving us feedback and telling us what worked and what didn't work. And it will really inform the task force's work moving forward. It's great to have you asking such good questions and really trying to think through how this will work, because it's this experience right here that's really going to set the stage for us releasing these in the spring. And so thank you again. Your feedback, your insight, your input is really just going to help shape questions that we'll be able to give to the field and say that these were created by the field for the field. And, you know, it will really help drive the success of it. So thank you.
Yes, yeah, thank you for taking the time, as Emily said, and we definitely look forward to hearing all of your feedback. Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing any more questions, so we might leave it at that, but definitely send an email if you do have further questions now or at any point in the field testing process, and we will definitely get back to you. So thank you again.